Good morning. Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about voting mechanisms, how people are actually voting, and this is in fact not about the efficiency kind which we have discussed earlier, which is basically about or based on the first best criteria. So voting rules could not require unanimity. First best in the sense unanimity condition, which is called the Pareto efficiency case. Therefore, normally in voting, it doesn't require unanimity. So, but if it is unanimity comes, no problem. But unanimity is not actually a necessary condition, but it is sufficient to have voting in that sense. So majority can be enough. Majority voting has its problem too. In fact, it will only work fine if we restrict ourselves to one type of a preference, like a single peaked preference about unidimensional issues, etc. So that is one thing about the voting, and voting on those will make the median voters the winner of the election, etc. So there are so many voting mechanisms which we will discuss eventually. So let's go to the details of voting. See, majority voting fails to allow for the expression of the intensity of preferences, so it can easily yield inefficient result in that sense. So this is a word of caution as far as the voting is concerned. Socially desirable decision making system again is a question, because this is as we discussed earlier, that when you aspire for growth and all, you have to basically move from state A to B. And if you strictly adhere to the principle of efficiency unanimity case, then you cannot basically move from state A to B, or you cannot aspire for growth and other things like that. So that is why we had basically gone for Caldor-Higgs compensation test and other things, because we need to really see that whether we can still make better social distribution, etc. Now, coming to the other aspect of voting, that is what we are trying to basically articulate today. This is most important, because uh, when some person, socially desirable or person, need to take a socially desirable decision, then they should satisfy certain principle, like social preference should be complete and transitive as our individual preference. Okay, these are bare minimum things normally everyone expect. That is, in order to have a preference relation, my preference ordering should be complete. That is either that is the case in such that if I have a choice of xy, then either I choose x or y or both, in that sense. So this is what is called the completeness axiom in that sense. Then it is also has to actually follow certain principle, like the transitivity, like this is basically makes me to be certain, basically. Okay, transitivity means a symbol, tripleton choice, like a b c. If I have x y z for me to choose, then if I am actually preferring a over b and b over c, then in the same ray of my choice, it implies that I prefer a over c, because my preference is actually a is greater than or preferred to c in that sense, because it is basically a transitive relation. Otherwise, if I say that I prefer a over b and b over c, I should also say that if I like a over c over a, then my choice become intransitive. So that means I'm not so consistent in that sense. So these are actually the kind of bare minimum proposition normally people try to put up to make a social preference. So in order to me having a preference, it implies that my preference ordering is complete and transitive in that sense. And if everyone prefers allocation A to allocation B, then I should be socially preferred to B in that sense. So A to B then should be socially preferred to B, and society's ranking of A and B should depend only on individuals ordering of these two allocation. not on how they rank other alternative. That is, it is called the independence of irrelevant alternative. This is one of the most important axiom, though we say that actually we normally don't see it coming. So independence of irrelevant alternatives are very important, because you cannot those things which you are talking about in your set has to be the thing which is actually determines your whole choice. Nothing other than that should influence you. This is actually the kind of an expectation one at least makes. So the final way of understanding is the non-dictatorship. Then that means I shouldn't impose upon my choice upon the other person. So non-dictatorship means if we are at least two individuals, then I shouldn't actually impose my choice on the other person, and they shouldn't impose their choice on me. So this is what is actually called a non-dictatorship case. That is, the social preference must not reflect preference of any a single individual. So I have already said that the unanimity condition, that is, you have to follow the Pareto, then you have to follow the non-dictatorship, you have to follow independence of a relevant alternative, you have to basically make a social ordering, and you have to make if a society prefers A or B, and then I must actually comply with it. So these are the kind of basic understanding basically people try to inflict upon, that is majority voting in that sense. So if you basically strictly adhered to all this bare minimum thing, you basically end up with a kind of situation which is called an impossibility of making choice without basically violating these principles. So for example, May's paper is actually talks a completely different proposition than Arrow, because Arrow says this is all the things basically based on the economic principle, like the unrestricted domain, the non-dictatorship, then the Pareto unanimity condition, then you have independent of irrelevant alternate, and you reference ordering in that sense. So these are the principle which Arrow used. So let's look into the proposition of what Arrow trying to make from the perspective of welfare maximization. Now, Arrow's impossibility theorem, or Arrow's paradox, demonstrates the impossibility of design a set of rules for social decision making that would obey every reasonable criteria required by the society, because whatever we had earlier pointed out are normally treated as a desirable thing as far as the society's choice is concerned. So society needs to agree on a preference order among several different options. Each individual in the society has particular personal preference order. So the problem is to find a social choice function in that sense, which transforms the set of preference orders, one for each individual, into the global social preference order, and it should have several desirable properties like the unrestricted domain or universality. The social choice function should be complete, be able to rank every possible set of transitive individual preference ordering, non-imposition or citizen sovereignty. Every possible societal preference order should be achievable by some set of an individual preference order in that sense, and non-dictatorship, as I said. So the social choice function should not imply, sorry, simply follow someone's preference while ignoring the others. So this is not been allowed. So if that is the case, then you have also the case which is called the unanimity or Pareto efficiency, which I have already mentioned. And if every individual prefer a certain option to another, then so must the resulting society's preferential order. Excuse me. I'm sorry. So independence of irrelevant alternatives, if we restrict attention to a subset of option and apply the social choice function only to those, then the result should be compatible with the outcome for the whole set of options. So change in individual ranking of an irrelevant alternative that is once outside the subset should have no impact on the society's ranking of the relevant subset in that sense. And if all this is actually goes well, Arrow's theorem says that if the decision-making body has at least two members and at least three options to decide among them, it is impossible to design a social choice function that satisfies all the conditions at once and respect and sensitivity too. So this is what is actually the kind of impossibility which he was trying to infer. The problem of aggregating welfare across an individual, if utility function can be defined only to an increasing monotonic transformation. All monotonic transformation of a given utility function should provide same information. In that sense, if you have a ux which is greater than uy and a vx which is greater than vy for all x and y, then uv are equivalent utility function in that sense. So if that is the case, then you have a utility of a one which is less than ua0 and ub1 which is greater than ub0. Any monotonic transformation ua and ub will maintain same ranking, so is equivalent utility mapping in that sense. So you can also have a variety of mapping of different kind of preference, and that's a different kind of similar equivalent kind of a utility, and map it together and see that whether this is actually follow the kind of impossibility which what Arrow try to conceptualize. And consider if you have all a certain phi and you have a u and ub, and any phi with preserves a1 which is less than va0 and vb1 which is greater than vb0 is an equivalent mapping to u, that is your capital utility function. So any point in quadrant 2 must have same preference mapping of u1 relative to u0. This is we can basically depict in a quadrant relation of utility that is actually given in this case. So look at the different quadrant which I have given, that is you have a ub and you have a ua, and in the first quadrant all points in zone I referred to u0. Now in the second quadrant we will come to that later, but in the fourth quadrant you suppose u1 prefers to u0, then all points in quadrant 2, that is you have a p which is u0 utility of individual a does not enter into the social welfare function in that context. So, okay, so we will come to that in a very detailed fashion in the upcoming portions. So let's state the impossibility theorem from all this principle, like problem of identifying social preference through the voting schemes in that. So this is one of the mechanism he was actually demonstrated with this case. So you have actually A, B, C, and you have three people like Smith, Jones, and Arrow. So if Smith's preference goes like this, 3 to 1 is actually his ordering, like A, B, C. For A, B, C, Smith gives 3 to 1 ordering. John gives 1 3 2 ordering, and Arrow gives 2 1 3 ordering. So 3 most preferred one is least preferred one in that case. Smith and Arrow prefer A to B. Smith and Jones prefer B to C. Jones and Arrow prefer C to A. So if that is the case, then you have a cycle. So a majority voting can lead to an intransitive reference because there is a cycle. That is, suppose vote only one on two options, that is A, that is A and B, then A prefers to B, Smith and Arrow, and B prefers to C, Smith and Jones. C prefers A, Jones and Arrow. So also voting cannot measure the intensity of individual preference. In this case, there is no intensity of preference being given. Therefore, there is definitely going to have a sort of a cycle, or what you call intransitivity. If it is a triple term, then you have an intransitive relation. If it is more than 3 element, then we will have a cycle which is called the no no which is actually is a very different criteria which I'll discuss later. So not impossibility problem, not relevant for roles social welfare function, does not make any interpersonal comparison, depend only on welfare of least well-off person, and but cannot answer many real world problem which involve trade-off. So or else implies extreme preference for status quo in that sense. So once you have this is, then you have also the issue of aggregation of preference or aggregating preference, finding a mechanism to aggregate the preference of a different individual. Economics of social choice handles that problem. We want social welfare function starting from the individual utility function of each agent Remember, we do not question those particular kind of an axiom, so that is not the kind of mechanism which we basically subscribes. So individual utility function might also include altruism. That altruism might be concerned with the future generation too, or with the non-human species. But we look at how these concerns are embodied in the individual utility function. So with that, let me you know stop the Arrows Impossibility case, because what is in a nutshell I would like to mention is that Arrows Impossibility Theorem is actually gives a lot of possibilities which normally which is basically out of box thinking. That is normally people had been given that you have to follow certain rules, and these rules has to be strictly adhered in order to make a social welfare fund. But Amartya Sen and all many social welfare economists basically broke all this kind of notions and says, earlier Samuelson said that in order to have a rational choice you should be consistent. But Amartya Sen said you need not to be consistent. Then there are so many critical points basically derived in the course of the social choice theories development, and people used to say that things can be much better even if you don't actually follow certain rules which we feel that has to be followed. And these are actually the kind of thing which we'll discuss in social choice theory, not in the microeconomics strictly, because we don't actually have time to discuss all this aspect in a detailed fashion in microeconomics. So let me stop today's lecture, and we will see the welfare function in the next lecture.